Hello. I will be reading chapter 13 of Sacred Sorrow by Michael Card. Chapter 13, Disease and Death. As he went, he cried, "Oh, my son Solomon! Oh, my son Solomon! If only I could have died instead of you! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" 2 Samuel 18:33. David lived long enough to endure the deaths of practically everyone he had ever loved. First it was his dearest friend Jonathan, killed in a battle on Mount Gilboa, along with his father Saul, who committed suicide. Both of their bodies were cruelly crucified on a wall in Bethshan. The valiant men of Jabesh Gilead journeyed through the night, stole back the bodies, burned and buried them. We are told in the first chapter of 2 Samuel that David composed a lament for the both of them, the man who hated him and the friend he loved the most. David ordered that everyone in Judah learn this lament he had composed to a long-lost melody he entitled The Song of the Bow. "How the mighty have fallen," David laments. Neither his bitterest enemy nor his dearest friend would return from the battle. He describes them both using words like beloved, gracious. The both of them were swifter than eagles and stronger than lions, but neither were swift nor strong enough to escape the deaths that awaited them on the desolate mountains of Gilboa. Through his tears, David pictures Jonathan lying dead upon the hills, because he cannot bring himself to see him hanging crucified on the walls of Bethshan. "How I weep for you, my brother Jonathan," David sings to the strains of that long, forgotten melody as he dissolves into tears. Evil and pain will not have the last word. The valley of the shadow of death is not our final destination. Michael Jenkins. A disturbing clarity. Next, in the mournful procession, was the innocent child born of his sin with Bathsheba. In the midst of the most successful period of his reign, having defeated the Ammonites and the Arameans, David took a suspicious break from what had been an almost continuous war. Even though it was spring, the time of year when kings normally returned to the battlefield, David stayed home, sending Joab out in his stead. But he learned that there are more wars to be fought in the spring than those of the battlefield. 9 months later, a son was born whose name we will never know. Nathan told David the innocent child was going to die for his sin. Then we are told that the child, still referred to as being of Uriah's wife, became ill. 2 Samuel 12:15. Despite all David's pleading, despite his fasting and prayers, the nameless little boy died on the 7th day. Had he lived but one more day, he would have been dedicated and so would have died with a name. Everyone was afraid to tell David the bad news. So great had been his lamenting of the child's sickness. How would he respond? But when he finally heard of the little boy's death, David underwent an unusual and unexpected transformation. He got up off the ground. He took a bath and put on clean clothes. He went to worship. Finally, he went home to break his week-long fast. His servants simply could not understand the sudden change in his emotional state. David's response reveals the kind of disturbing clarity that only lament affords. "While he was alive, there was still a chance," he said. "I thought to myself, who knows, maybe the Lord will let the boy live, but now he's gone, and nothing I can do will bring him back. I will some day go to be with him, but he will never return to me." It is usually seen as the next event in the chronological chain, but the connection between this event and the next is important. David laments the loss of his baby son, and then, having exhausted himself in lament, he returns to comfort Bathsheba, now his wife. Out of that comfort, Solomon is born, the boy God named Jedediah, beloved of the Lord. The same stubborn refusal to let go of God that is expressed in his laments empowered David to stubbornly refuse to be destroyed by the grief of innocent death and the despair of knowing it was all a consequence of his sin. The painful realities of death and sin had somehow been dealt with during his time of lament. They had been offered in worship to the God David was beginning to learn could be trusted. Lament leads us in the direction of that kind of clarity. Only by realizing the reality of the pain and acknowledging through lament to God our powerlessness and hopelessness can we arrive at such a place of freedom as David inhabited. Innocent children die as a result of the sins of others every second on this planet. As much as we can bear, the pain needs to be acknowledged. But on the other side, by God's grace, a comfort comes. On the other side of the line that every lament must cross, Chesed is always waiting, and by it, every day, more children are born who are beloved by the Lord. A disturbing despair. David's son Absalom was handsome. He was vain. It was said of him that he stole the hearts of the men of Israel. In a fit of righteous rage, he murdered his own brother Amnon for the rape of his sister Tamar. In fear of reprisals, he ran away to his grandfather's and hid for 3 years. When finally he slinked back to Jerusalem, David refused to speak to him for another 2 years. The rift between David and Absalom would never be healed. In time, he would lead a successful revolt, forcing his father David to flee Jerusalem. His name literally means the father of peace, but it was precisely the peace of his father that Absalom obliterated by his pride. When finally their 2 armies fought near the forest of Ephraim, Absalom lost 20,000 of his own men. As he fled, we are told his long hair got tangled in the boughs of a tree, and he was slain. David sat pitifully, waiting at the gate like the father of the prodigal who would never return. When finally he heard the news, in stark contrast to the miraculous recovery we just saw after the death of Bathsheba's first son, David broke down completely. For once he did not compose a formal lament. "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" There was no tune. There was no poetry, only the repetitious, incoherent sobbing of a father whose son, though he had just died, he had lost long ago. The disease of abandonment. When faced with a lingering disease, David apparently more than once composed psalms of lament. Psalm 6 is tagged as a sheminith, the Hebrew word for 8. Some scholars believe this is a musical term denoting the lowest note that can be sung by a male voice. Others think it may be a reference to an 8-stringed instrument. In this lament, David cries out to the Lord for healing. "How long?" he groans again and again, like an impatient patient. In Psalm 13, he also repeatedly cries out, "How long?" but finds rest in the end in the trust he has in God's chesed. He confesses his terror in verse 3, but still appeals to God on the basis of his chesed in the following verse. Though the presence of disease causes David to question the mysterious inconsistencies of God's chesed, he refuses to doubt neither the existence nor the reality of it. From our limited perspective, disease and death will always seem inconsistent with God's loving kindness. But at the same time, the foundation of all hope in every lament is always chesed as well. The ever-present enemies that seem to always be lurking in the shadows of David's life reappear in all the disease laments. From his sickbed, he calls out to them, "Away from me!" In this, as well as other laments of disease, there is troubling awareness in the psalmist that his sickness, like Job's, might provide proof to his enemies that he is guilty of some unspoken sin. Through his lament, he seeks God's forgiveness, healing, and protection from this shame in the presence of his enemies. Present also in the disease laments is a sense of being cut off from the community at large by this false indication of guilt. Darkest of all David's sickness laments is Psalm 38. Some might argue that Psalm 22 is the most despairing, but I do not read it simply as a psalm of disease. Its scope is far greater. The language is full of the blackest sort of imaginings and images. The sickness feels like arrows piercing his flesh. His wounds are festering and loathsome. There's a burning pain in his back. His heart is pounding. He seems to have become blind as well as deaf and mute. Perhaps even more painful is the rejection and abandonment of his friends and neighbors. The hurtful implication once more is that they keep their distance because they believe his illness is the result of sin. Maybe they showed up at first like Job's friends to comfort him, but now they are all gone. While his friends have vanished, his enemies seem to be everywhere. They gloat, they slander, and hate him for no reason. Death's dark cloud. It is clear that God redeemed David's personal, intimate experience of disease and death and used it to put words to the pain and suffering for all of us. For those who are suffering, as well as those who long to better understand and enter into the suffering of others. David's laments of sickness tell us that even physical suffering is rooted in one dark and basic fear, being separated from the presence of God. Deep inside us, something knows that this separation would literally be hell. Disease threatens us by its very existence, which tempts us to fear that God is separate, is not present, is hiding, is asleep, has forgotten. In David's mind, hell is the hidden face of God. Death, by its dark finality, poses the final unknowable test of faith. All of us are left standing on this side of that threatening door with the fear that when we do pass through, we might not find God waiting for us on the other side. Author Albert Y. Hsu gives us this perspective on death and grief. Christians sometimes think that we are not supposed to grieve because our faith and theology provide us with confidence about heaven and eternal life. But while 1 Thessalonians 4:13 says that we are not to grieve as those who have no hope, we grieve nevertheless. Those without hope grieve in one way, those with hope grieve in another. Either way, grief is universal and not to be avoided. It is a legitimate response to loss. The fall that ushered lament into the world is a dark cloud, a cloud of unknowing. When death and disease come, we are enveloped for a time in the cloud. As it blows over us, we fear it might cut us off from healing, resurrecting presence. For one confused moment, we misunderstand, thinking its very existence is the ultimate contradiction to chesed. For one brief instant, we cannot see the face of our Father. Through a lament, we push into and through, not around the cloud. Only do that we then completely reach the other side, the place where we find Jesus waiting for us. If you think about it, there isn't much in life that isn't life-threatening. We all carry deep within ourselves a pressurized reservoir of tears. It takes only the right key at the right time to unlock them. The lock can be forced, or the unlocking can happen prematurely to our ruin. But in God's perfect time, through lament, when these tears are released, they can form a vast healing flood.